Welcome to another episode of Global Insights in Professional Security, where we take on the big issues in security and how it interrelates with business, law, the media, and other big phenomena. Today, we talk about security and government, and I'm proud to welcome Howard Schweitzer. Howard is CEO of Cozen O'Connor Public Strategies, which is a government relations arm of Cozen O'Connor, one of the 100 largest law firms in the world. And Howard's a partner there as well. He's held several senior roles in government in both the Obama and Bush administrations, including as the first chief operating officer of the TARP. And if you recall, that's the bank bailout program run by Hank Paulson and Tim Geithner. And I would be remiss if I didn't let you know that Howard has his very own podcast, which I highly recommend. It's entertaining and informative. It's called the Beltway Briefing. And it's available in all the usual places like Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple. First of all, thank you so much for appearing on the program, Howard, and welcome.
Mike, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So let's dive right in, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, it's no secret that we're coming out of maybe the most divisive election certainly in recent history. The populace is as split as ever. Nobody got a mandate, even though Biden won by 7 million votes. He narrowly won in very key states. Trump, as we know, is still fighting the legitimacy of the election. And
Right.
assuming, I think most of us are assuming now we're moving into a Biden administration. We're coming.
100%.
Okay, great. We're moving out of COVID. We've been under lockdown for almost a year. Innovation being stifled and people getting, trapped at home. The economy is in a tailspin. It's with lots of businesses closed, but we've also adapted well too to working at home. A lot of good has come out of it, but I think nobody will be missing 2020. On top of that, we've had all sorts of environmental problems like forest fires out of control and record number of hurricanes. And as 2020 can kindly be called an inauspicious year. So for all that background, I'm going to let you talk. Hopefully we're coming to a fresh new year, a restart.
A reboot, Mike, a reboot.
Okay, good. So what does that look like for government generally and for security in particular?
So before I answer the question you actually asked me, I want to say one thing about 2020, and that is that at least as it relates to the electoral and political and government process, because that's what I do day in and day out at Cozen, yes, it's been extremely divisive, and yes, we are polarized and everything everybody on CNN says every day, but the system works. Like if like the optimistic view of what we've been through is that, guess what, people voted, the system is held, and the system works. And look, the Democrats didn't win the election. They won the presidency, but they didn't win the election. People were very thoughtful when they went to the polls, figuratively or literally, and they cast their ballots very thoughtfully, split tickets in many places. So I think people participated in the process at record levels never seen before. And so it's a little bit of a counter narrative to what people say day in and day out. And I think there's a lot to celebrate, not about 2020, but about the way our political system has held up. But certainly it's enormously consequential, and we'll see what happens in Georgia next week. But it's enormously consequential, Mike, what happens in Georgia. But the fact that Biden is going to be the next president, despite Trump's protestations to the contrary, it's enormously consequential for government generally and for security specifically. And as it relates to government generally, Trump Trump was sent to Washington to tear down the bureaucracy. And that's what he viewed his mandate as. And love him or hate him, he did what he said he was going to do in large measure. That doesn't mean that I like it or agree with it. It's certainly very different than the presidential administrations I worked in. But the first thing Biden's going to do is rebuild the institutions of government, and he absolutely has that in mind. That's why he's bringing back people who worked in the Obama administration, who have helmed the ship before. And to me, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, is like the poster child for that. Trump has made that a single issue department by and large. It's been all immigration all the time. It was a litmus test for anybody working there. You had acting upon acting upon acting, people holding various jobs, including the secretary's job, because the policy was really run out of the White House. And so I think DHS is like the poster child for the vacant agency. And I think Biden's first priority at an institutional level is to kind of rebuild the federal government on some level.
Do you think he will get? You said so many interesting things there. I don't want to take us off track, but one of the things that you said were, okay, the system worked. We had unprecedented participation. True, but we also have a sizable amount of the electorate, especially the Republican electorate, that harbors serious doubts about the legitimacy of the election. I saw a figure that said something like 80% of Republican voters, and I can't tell you the source of this, I saw it yesterday, have expressed doubt, or have expressed that there was quite likely that there was some fraud in mail-in voting. And if you have so much of the electorate questioning the cornerstones of our system of government, of our democracy, that how can government function at all? Now, this could be like a 2-hour discourse. I didn't want to distract you from that.
No, but it is a security issue because people have been protesting, and so I think it's an issue for the security world for sure. Kind of destabilization.
Exactly.
Look, it's an issue, but I also, and as you noted in your intro, I've worked for both sides. And I'm one of those people in Washington who kind of works with everybody. So I'm not saying this from a partisan perspective at all, but Joe Biden he was the most moderate candidate in the Democratic field, which isn't to say he's a centrist. He's a liberal Democrat. But in tone, in substance, he has much more in common with the people that feel disenfranchised in this country than Donald Trump does. And I guess I believe that over time, he's being very deliberate, and we're talking to his team very regularly. He's being very deliberate in how he's organizing government, and very thoughtful about it. And I think over time he will take the dialogue and bring it down to a more measured and reasonable level. And I think tone at the top really matters. And I think he's the right guy for the moment.
Interesting. Again, you said a lot of things that can go a lot of different ways, but I wanted to mention, you made an excellent point about when you question government institutions, that destabilizes, more than the government, destabilizes society. And we're already seeing people going down the QAnon rabbit hole, people thinking that, 5G is a conspiracy to, take over their free will or something. As a matter of fact, they're surmising now, and I don't know whether this will pan out, that the Nashville bombing was undertaken in front of a Verizon building as some sort of protest against 5G, and that this person might have been so. And we're seeing attacks by QAnon and by other people who are not necessarily tethered to a common narrative or mainstream narrative, to put it kindly. So how does Biden put the pieces back together and sort of get trust back in the government, especially since Trump is going to be throwing spitballs at him from the side, to also put it politely.
So I I happened to hear another podcast, Mike, by a Tulane University professor who studies conspiracies. I can't remember his name offhand, but it was basically the gist of it was how you talk to people who believe in conspiracies, and kind of the underlying premise, by the way, was even though it feels like it because of the internet, there are no more conspiracies around today. There are always conspiracies. And so let's not get too caught up in QAnon and some of these things because they're kind of always out there. But you don't you don't deal with them by telling them that what they believe isn't right. You try to is wrong. You try to persuade them of little bits and pieces of information that kind of bring them to a more informed place. And look, I think look, there's a tremendous amount of disenfranchisement in this country, in the world, globally, because the things that we see happening here are happening in every other Western nation as well. It's technology, it's the borderless society, it is um, the economic security. I think I think Biden is going to prioritize economic security um, because and as a human right, healthcare security, um, because I think those are things that bring people to a better place, and people rightfully feel like society is like the deck is stacked against them, which is why Trump got elected in the first place. And it's why I think Biden won, because I think he's a guy who can speak to the things that people are missing.
That's an excellent answer, a very thoughtful answer. Thank you. I'm going to rein it back in and bring you back towards policy. And you talked a little about, okay, the first thing that Biden's going to do is, you know, put people in the right places and sort of set things up again so it can function. The Trump administration prioritized things like border security, immigration, protectionism. Presumably, there'll be less emphasis on that with the Biden administration. So, where does that go with respect to security, DHS?
I mean, I think ultimately DHS. I don't think that he'll necessarily come in and unwind Trump's approach to border security. And I think he'll stop building the wall or whatever that is. And I think the tone will be there very different, and we won't have obviously on something like separation of children and parents. It'll be the tone will be very different, but actually the numbers aren't very different as far as all the various statistics on enforcement between Obama and Trump.
It's
And
rhetoric,
so
right? It's just rhetoric.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's rhetoric, and I think the rhetoric will change quite substantially. And I think they'll take a broader view of what it means to run the Department of Homeland Security, and it's in all its breadth, disaster preparedness and physical individual security, um, intelligence sharing, and coordination with local law enforcement things. And and look, we also had all the issues that arose this summer with law enforcement, and those are very thorny issues, and he's got to work through that. So I think his focus will be holistic as it relates to security, and not kind of single issue focus like Trump has been.
Great. And actually, you led me to the next question I was going to ask, where on the big picture with Homeland Security, that's what makes all the headlines. But what really affects you and I and our communities and everybody else is what's happening on the local and state level. We've seen massive budget cuts because of the recession
Mhm.
and local reduced tax base. What does that mean for state and local approach to security, law enforcement, etc.?
Well, it depends where you're talking about because some states are doing fine and other states are doing horribly. For example, Georgia, and I looked at this recently because I was interested in how it would play into the Georgia Senate races. Georgia actually has a budget surplus. So they're doing fine down there. California, New York, not so much. So you really can't, even on this issue, paint with a broad brush. But obviously, COVID has cut into revenue bases for state and local government, and so they're going to be forced to be more thoughtful about how they pay for things and how much they pay for things and how they go about procuring things, and that's going to have consequences for companies.
Yeah, that's very interesting what you said. It's just going to go a little editorializing here or tangent. You read papers on one side, and all the problems are in the blue states, and they're being supported by the red states. Then you read the other set of papers and opinion and blogs, and it's the exact opposite. And they both have data to back up their points.
Yeah.
It's bewildering, even to people who are who try to keep up with this stuff because
Well, Mike, you and I both went to law school. We know you can argue two sides of any issue.
that's true. But what for the few people right now whose minds can be changed or in the middle, it's like what do? They just try to keep informed, and it's almost overwhelming.
Well, yeah, and on the state and local issue, so yeah, it is kind of a red state, blue state thing in broad strokes. And it's been probably the number one, it's been the Democrats' top priority, near top priority, um, as part of COVID relief, one of their top priorities. And the Republicans have been dead set against the Democratic asks. So the Democrats went for a much bigger package initially and frankly rolled the dice because they thought they were going to win the election. And at the end of the day, the $900 billion package that the president just signed is very substantial, but it's more along the lines of the Senate Republican approach, which was not abundant relief for state and local government. Even if the Democrats win both Georgia Senate races, which the smart money is on them not, but they can. I, I I still don't see it's still a 50-50 Senate with Democratic control because Kamala will break the tie. But I still think it's going to be very difficult to get substantial state and local funding out of the Senate. So I don't think that if you're reliant upon this issue, the federal government isn't coming to the rescue. Let's put it that way.
Fair enough.
States are going to have to get more creative.
Fair enough. Last question. We are running out of our 20 minutes. It seems like we've been talking for two, but I want to ask you about private sector impacts. You're familiar with the private sector environment. What does it look like? Where last year there was a lot of retrenching. Personally, I know a lot of companies that had cutbacks, that they lost staff. They pulled back. They pulled back on their research and development or their outreach or um, marketing efforts. Now that we're starting to come out of this morass, well, I don't want to presume an answer. What do you think of the what do you see as as someone who knows the industry pretty well?
Uh, I think that it's going to be a very strong recovery once in some this is like anything else. There are winners and losers. Let me say that. Like I, I have clients that have been their business has gone through the roof during COVID because of the nature of what they do. Maybe it's a virtual kind of offering. They go through the roof. I have clients that have suffered tremendously, like airlines, major airlines. That obviously we know what's happened there. It depends, and on small businesses obviously have gotten crushed. Again, depending upon what space, but if you're many hotels are small businesses. Obviously, restaurants are small businesses. Um, they've just gotten crushed. And I think in broad strokes, the comeback, the economic comeback has been strong. Um, and I think once we're fully vaccinated, so to speak, it will be strong, but it'll take a long time. Uh, Look, it's not dissimilar from what I said about TARP when I was coming out of Treasury. Uh, the we'll come back, but there's going to be the economic workout. It's going to take some years. There's also going to be the political workout and the logistical workout. Like, how did we get where we have been? Like, such a like how can the U.S. be the worst country on the face of the earth when it comes to COVID? And in the most advanced economy on the face of the earth,
And most
it
advanced
doesn't make
medicine.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. We're
Yeah.
going to be studying that for the next decade. There's going to be hell to pay politically, I believe, eventually. And it's going to take a while. The Fed has said they're keeping interest rates basically at zero for 2 or 3 years. Like, it's going to take a while, but certain segments will come back. I think people start traveling like crazy once they feel secure and kind of all the pent up. But if you're in security, to answer your more specific question, um, I think I think if I were, I would be thinking about how do you define security. I think the definition of how we think about what security means, has the potential to change a little bit here. Post 9/11, it was all about terrorism. Um, Now it's going to be biosecurity on top of physical security,
Safety protocols. Yeah.
safety, pandemic
Hmm.
preparedness,
Hmm.
and disaster response plans,
Yep.
and also economic security, like I was saying earlier. So if I were a company in the security space, that's what I'd be thinking about. How do I fit into that broader ecosystem that's maybe changing? If you're a CSO inside a big company, I think your role just became a lot broader than it was a year ago because of the pandemic. And I don't know. I think that's some of the stuff I'd be thinking about.
Well, that's very perceptive of you because I actually do work in that area, as you know, but we haven't talked about this. But that's exactly what's happening with the role of the CSO. It's broadening. It's taking on more business continuity aspects and safety. As a matter of fact,
Mhm.
ASIS is now rewriting its CSO standard. I'm sure it's going to be taking in all these factors as it evolves. I will leave us, and we have to go, but I'll leave us with one positive note or one thing to look forward to. I work with a lot of established security companies and startups, and everyone's sitting in their basement working on these great things, and they're just waiting for this to be over to unleash all this creativity. And people are doing
Yeah.
great things, and I think we're gonna have an explosion of creativity and innovation coming up.
Yeah. Agreed.
Um, so that's enough. That's all the time we have. Thanks so much, Howard.
Mike, thanks for having me. This was great.
Yeah, my pleasure.